I never thought a simple walk would turn into something that would sit with me forever. It started as nothing more than a way to clear my head. I had been carrying too much weight in my mind, stress from work, bills, the feeling that I was wasting my time. The woods were supposed to be my escape, a place where I could breathe without hearing cars, without hearing people. I parked my car on the side of a quiet road, locked it, slung a small backpack over my shoulders, and stepped off the gravel shoulder into the tree line. The first few minutes felt like they always do when you go into the woods. The ground was soft, covered with layers of pine needles and leaves that crunched faintly under my boots. The air was cool, damp, carrying the sharp smell of wet soil. I could hear the distant sound of birds and the occasional rustle of something small moving through the undergrowth. I followed what looked like a faint trail, not an official one, but enough of a path where grass was pressed down and there was a natural opening between the trees. At first, I wasn't thinking about where I was going. I just walked. The deeper I went, the more the woods swallowed me. The sound of the road vanished behind me. I remember pausing once, turning back, and realizing I couldn't see the opening I had come from. It didn't bother me at the time. I had been in woods before. I knew all I had to do was turn back if I wanted to. But instead of turning back, I kept going. The trail started fading, thinning out into nothing but patches of dirt and roots, until eventually I wasn't even sure if I was following a trail anymore. I looked around and saw only trees. Straight, tall, thin trunks, each one almost identical to the next. The ground dipped and rose in small slopes, and I followed whichever way seemed easiest, convincing myself I was moving in some direction that would eventually meet another trail, or maybe a creek I could follow back out. I walked longer than I expected. My legs grew sore. The woods started to feel heavier, darker. When I checked my phone, the screen showed no service. The battery was already at half, and I told myself I wouldn't waste it on useless apps. I shoved it back into my pocket and kept walking, but the first twinge of unease crept in. The thing about woods is how quickly they make you feel small. Every tree looks like the last. You think you're moving in a straight line, but you're not. You curve, you drift, and without realizing it, you circle back on yourself. I noticed it the first time when I came across a fallen log covered in moss. I stepped over it and kept walking, only to see it again later from the other side. I knew it was the same one by the way it leaned, by the rotten hole near the base. My stomach dropped. Somehow I had turned in a loop. The more I tried to correct myself, the more lost I became. I started looking for the sun, thinking I could use it to guide me, but the canopy was thick, the trees crowding overhead so tightly that only scraps of light filtered through, breaking apart into weak beams. I couldn't tell east from west. The woods grew quieter. The birds stopped calling. The air felt heavier, thick with stillness, and I began to hear only my own breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. I realized how dry my mouth was, so I pulled a bottle of water from my backpack and took slow sips, trying not to waste it. The longer I walked, the more I noticed the details that made me uneasy. A patch of trees with bark stripped away as if clawed at by something. Piles of animal droppings I couldn't identify. A silence that felt too heavy, like the woods were watching me, though I knew that was just in my head. I tried to calm myself. I told myself I'd find my way out if I just kept moving. I remembered hearing that if you keep walking in one direction, eventually you have to hit a road or a clearing. So I picked a line between two trees and told myself I would stick to it no matter what. Hours passed. The sky dimmed. Shadows grew long and sharp, stretching between the trees until the forest was striped with darkness. I checked my phone again, hoping maybe for a bar of service, but it was useless. The battery ticked lower. When I finally admitted I wouldn't find my way out before night, I knew I had to make a place to stop. I didn't bring camping gear, just a small backpack with water, a granola bar, and a light jacket. It wasn't enough. I found a spot near a thick tree where the roots curved above the ground, forming a sort of half wall I could lean against. I cleared away some sticks and sat down, hugging my knees, listening to the forest shift into night. That's when the real fear set in. The dark in the woods is not the same as the dark in your house. It presses against you. You can't see more than a few feet, and every sound feels louder, closer. I heard movement in the leaves, small at first, then heavier. Branches snapped somewhere off to my left. My throat tightened. I sat as still as I could, heart pounding. I told myself it was deer. It had to be. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever moved out there knew I was there. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My eyes kept snapping open at every noise, and the cold crept into my bones. The night dragged on forever, each minute stretching thin, until finally a gray light began to seep into the sky. When morning came, I felt like I hadn't rested at all. My body ached. My mouth was dry. I forced myself to get up and keep moving, though part of me wanted to stay in that spot and wait, hoping someone would stumble across me. But I knew nobody would. I walked for hours again. I rationed my water, only a few small sips at a time. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. The granola bar was gone. I kept thinking I heard water, faint trickles, but every time I followed the sound, it faded into nothing. By the second night, I was exhausted beyond reason. My legs shook as I walked, and my head pounded with each step. I thought I saw shapes between the trees sometimes, but I knew it was just my tired eyes. I found another spot against a tree and collapsed, my body screaming for rest even though my mind stayed sharp with fear. The noises came again, this time heavier, something moving steadily, circling. My skin prickled. I could hear the crunch of leaves being pressed under weight. Slow, deliberate steps. I stayed frozen. My breaths were shallow and my ears strained for every sound. At one point I thought I heard breathing that wasn't mine, low, steady, too heavy for an animal like a deer. I wanted to move, to run, but my body refused. When morning came again, the ground around where I had sat was disturbed. Leaves were pushed aside, dirt scraped like something had passed close by. My water was nearly gone. I knew I had to find something, anything, or I wouldn't last another day. I stumbled forward, dizzy, my lips cracked from thirst. My vision blurred. Then I heard it, faint at first, but real this time. The sound of water. A steady trickle. I followed it, pushing through branches, tripping over roots until I saw a small stream winding through the trees. I fell to my knees beside it, scooping water into my hands. It tasted like dirt and metal, but I didn't care. I drank until my stomach hurt, then splashed my face, letting the cold water soak into my skin. It gave me just enough strength to keep going. I followed the stream, hoping it would lead somewhere. Creeks often run toward roads or larger rivers. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the water, to keep moving no matter what. The forest didn't get easier. The trees stayed endless. The silence stayed heavy. But by the time the third night came, I saw something in the distance. Through the thinning trees, I spotted a line that didn't look natural. A break in the woods. I stumbled toward it, heart racing, and then I saw it. A dirt road cutting through the trees. Not wide, not paved, but real. I fell onto it, lying there for a moment, staring up at the darkening sky. My chest shook with relief. I didn't know which way to go, but I knew the road meant people. It meant something human. I picked myself up, turned left, and started walking. My legs felt like they could give out at any second, but I kept putting one foot in front of the other. Eventually, headlights cut through the distance. A truck rattled toward me, slowing as it reached where I stood swaying in the road. That's when I knew I was saved. The fear didn't end there, though. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the weight of those woods pressing in on me. The endless trees. The nights of waiting, listening, knowing something had moved out there just beyond where I could see. I was lucky to come out. Very lucky. But the woods never leave you once you've been lost in them. They stay in your head, in your bones. And I know deep down that if I ever step off the road again, they'll be waiting. I remember the air that morning felt sharp and clean, the kind of cool that wakes you up without needing coffee. The sun was only a few fingers above the tree line, its weak gold light spilling through thin clouds. I had gone out with the idea that a long hike alone would clear my head. It wasn't the first time I had wandered off trails, and I thought I knew enough about the woods to manage. I had grown up camping, fishing, and walking long stretches of forest roads. But this time I underestimated the place. I parked my car near a gravel turnout by a dirt road that cut into the national forest. There wasn't an official trailhead there. No signs, no maps pinned to posts. Just an old dirt road used by hunters and maybe some loggers. I thought it would be quiet, away from people. I carried a small backpack, a water bottle, a lighter, a pocket knife, some trail mix in a zip bag, and a thin rain jacket. I left my phone in the car because I didn't want to be distracted by messages or feel the weight of carrying it. That was mistake number one. At first the walk was easy. The dirt road stretched ahead, rutted and overgrown in places, and it felt like a secret path. On both sides the forest closed in thick and green. Pines rose tall and straight, their trunks dark and damp with patches of moss. Lower down, tangled undergrowth formed walls that made it impossible to see very far. The air smelled of pine needles and wet earth, that strong organic scent that feels both clean and heavy. After walking maybe an hour, the road split into a clearing where tire tracks seemed to fade out into weeds. It looked like hunters had driven in long ago, but the road hadn't been used in years. There was no real path anymore, just faint pressed grass and open space between the trees. I didn't think twice. I just walked forward into the woods, telling myself I'd loop around eventually and come back to the road. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. The breeze dropped and the sound of traffic, faint before, was gone completely. The silence pressed in. I could hear my own steps crunching twigs, the brush of leaves against my jacket, the steady rhythm of my breathing. At first it was calming, then little by little it became unnerving. Every sound I made seemed too loud, like it was carrying too far. I kept walking, trying to keep the sun behind me to orient myself. But the clouds thickened, dimming the light, and the sun blurred into a gray patch I couldn't use as a compass anymore. The trees grew closer together, the undergrowth thicker. I had to push through tangles of thorn and low branches. My arms were scratched and little beads of blood welled up on my skin. The smell of damp rot was stronger here. Mushrooms clinging to fallen logs, wet soil giving off that heavy musk. I stopped at one point and looked around. Nothing looked familiar. Every direction showed the same walls of trees, the same dark trunks and patches of green. I turned in a slow circle, trying to recognize something I had passed. There was nothing. That was the first moment a tightness gripped my chest. I told myself I wasn't lost. I just had to pick a direction and keep going. The road couldn't be far. I chose what I thought was the way back and walked faster. My footsteps echoed in my head like a drumbeat. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, nothing changed. No road, no clearing, just more endless forest. The ground sloped down, pulling me into a shallow valley. The soil was softer here, wet and muddy in places. A thin trickle of water ran between rocks, making the air colder. My shoes were damp. The trees grew even taller, blocking more of the light, and the sky above looked like a dark ceiling. I drank from my bottle, trying not to think about how much was left. The cold water felt good, but it didn't calm the dryness in my mouth that came from nerves. The forest sounds began to play tricks on me. Every time I stopped, I swore I could hear faint movements, leaves shifting, twigs snapping far off. Sometimes it was sharp, like the crack of a branch breaking. I told myself it was deer or small animals, but the sound lingered too long in my mind. I realized how alone I was. If something happened, there was no one to hear me, no one to find me. I pressed on. By late afternoon, the light began to die in a way that was sudden and frightening. In the woods, darkness comes earlier than in open places. The canopy swallowed the last of the day, and the trees turned into black pillars against a dim gray sky. I knew if I didn't make it back before night, I'd be in trouble. My chest felt tight again, like I couldn't get enough air. I thought I saw an opening ahead, a lighter patch through the trees. My legs burned as I rushed toward it. But when I got there, it was only a boggy clearing, soggy ground with reeds and shallow pools. Mosquitoes rose in clouds. My shoes sank into the mud, sucking at my steps. The smell of stagnant water was foul, sour, and heavy. I backed out quickly, slapping at my arms. That was when I realized how loud my heartbeat was. It thudded in my ears faster and faster. The last of the light drained away. The forest became a black wall. My eyes strained to adjust, but the shapes blurred together. I used my lighter once, flicking it on just to see around me. The flame gave a tiny circle of light, showing twisted branches and rough bark, then went out again. It wasn't enough. I decided I had no choice but to stop. Walking blind through the woods at night was worse than waiting. I found a dry patch beneath a pine tree where the needles had built up into a soft mat. I sat with my back against the trunk, pulling my jacket tight. The night air was cold and damp, and I shivered. The darkness was absolute. My ears strained to catch every sound. Rustling leaves. A faint snap. Something moving far off. Then silence again. I couldn't sleep. My body was too tense. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of images. Getting injured, being stuck here forever, never being found. My stomach growled. The trail mix forgotten somewhere deep in my bag, but the thought of eating in the dark with animals around made me freeze. Hours dragged on. The night seemed endless. At one point I thought I heard steady crunching footsteps. Not a deer darting, but slow, deliberate. They faded away before I could be sure. I sat frozen, gripping the small pocket knife in my hand, my knuckles white. When the blackness finally lifted, it wasn't relief. Not really. The dawn light was gray and weak. My body ached from sitting against the tree. My mouth was dry, and when I swallowed, it felt like sandpaper. I took a sip of water, smaller this time. My hands trembled. I stood and forced myself to move again. I picked what I thought was east, hoping to find a road or river. Hours passed. My legs grew heavier. My stomach cramped with hunger. My thoughts slowed, looping around the same fear. No one knows where I am. By midday, I stumbled into another clearing. This one was ringed with tall grass and old stumps. I saw something there that made my stomach flip. A shredded blue tarp half buried in leaves, faded and torn. Nearby, rusted cans lay scattered, old food containers picked clean. It looked like someone had camped there years ago and left it to rot. For a moment, I thought maybe it was hope. Proof that people had been here. But the sight of it was worse somehow. The place felt abandoned, forgotten. Whoever camped here had left for good reason. I pressed on, weaker now. My bottle was nearly empty. The forest pressed closer. My head throbbed, my vision blurry at times. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, moving only because I forced them. When the second night came, I knew I wouldn't last long without finding something. I built a small fire with my lighter and dry sticks I managed to gather. The tiny flame flickered weakly, giving me only a few feet of light. The fire smoked, the smell filling my lungs, and I coughed, but I kept feeding it because the dark without it was unbearable. In the distance again, I thought I heard movement, a steady rustle, then a pause. My skin prickled. I told myself it was animals circling the light, curious. I held the knife tight in my hand. Every minute felt stretched thin, like it would snap. That night I barely closed my eyes. When I did, I dreamed of walking in circles forever. The same trees repeating, the same shadows waiting. Morning came again, and I pushed myself to move, weaker than before. I stumbled often, catching my feet on roots, falling once hard on my knee. Pain shot up my leg, sharp and hot. I cried out, but the sound died in the trees. I sat there holding my knee, and for a moment the weight of it all nearly crushed me. But I kept moving, dragging my leg, every step a struggle. Then, late in the afternoon, just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I heard it. A faint humming sound, low and steady. I froze, straining to listen. It grew louder as I pushed through the trees. And then I saw it. A power line cutting through the forest. The metal tower rising like a skeleton above the trees. I had never been so relieved at the sight of something man-made. I followed the cleared strip beneath it, walking through tall grass and weeds. The line led to a service road, rough and muddy, but wide enough for trucks. I limped along it for what felt like forever until I saw the distant shape of a small building, an electrical substation fenced in with chain link. Beyond it, a paved road curved away. I had not planned on going deep into the woods that day. I had been hiking before, I had camped before, and I always thought I knew my limits. The trail I started on was supposed to be easy. It was marked, clean, and used by plenty of people every weekend. I had only meant to follow it for a few hours, maybe take a few photos, eat some snacks, and then head back to the car. But when I saw a narrow path that branched off the main one, barely visible, I thought it would be interesting to see where it led. It looked older, less traveled, and curiosity pulled me forward. That small choice would change everything. The further I went, the thinner the trail became. Branches bent into the path, Leaves brushed against my arms and dry sticks cracked under my shoes. At first, I kept track of the main trail behind me, thinking I could just turn around whenever I wanted, but the undergrowth grew thicker and the ground turned uneven. I told myself I'd only go a little farther, that I'd see where it opened up, maybe find a small clearing to rest in before turning back. I kept walking. The sun had been high when I entered, and light poured through the trees. But after an hour or so, I realized how fast the forest swallowed it. The air turned cooler, shadows stretched longer, and the silence of the woods pressed in. I stopped and looked back, but the path I thought I had followed was gone. There was only green and brown all around, no sign of footprints, no cut branches to guide me back. That was the moment I first felt the knot of worry tighten in my stomach. I told myself not to panic. People got lost in the woods all the time. All I needed to do was retrace my steps or walk in one direction until I crossed the trail again. But the more I tried to move back the way I came, the less sense it made. Everything looked the same. The same tall trees, the same tangled bushes, the same uneven dirt littered with pine needles. After 20 minutes of trying to backtrack, I had to accept that I wasn't just wandering, I was lost. The ground began to slope downward. I followed it, thinking maybe it would lead me to a stream or an open area. The air was damp and smelled of soil. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat. Every sound was louder now. The caw of a crow, the snap of a twig somewhere unseen, the flutter of wings high in the branches. The woods that had seemed calm earlier now felt heavy, like they were closing in on me. I pulled out my phone, hoping the GPS would at least show me where I was. But there was no signal. The map wouldn't load. I stared at the blank screen for a long time before shoving it back into my pocket. I walked for hours. My legs grew sore and my throat dry. I had brought only a small bottle of water and a granola bar. The water was half gone already. I didn't want to think about what I would do when it ran out. The forest floor was uneven, full of roots that caught at my shoes and patches of mud that sucked at them. I tripped more than once, skinning my hands when I hit the ground. The dirt clung to me, the damp smell sinking into my nose. When the sun began to drop lower, I knew I was in trouble. I had nothing to sleep with, no blanket, no tent, no flashlight. The light faded fast under the trees, faster than it would have in the open. By the time I finally stopped walking, the forest was dim and silent except for the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I sat at the base of a tree, hugging my knees, trying to ignore the fear climbing inside me. My mind raced. What if I never found the trail? What if I kept walking in circles forever? What if I collapsed out here, too weak to move, and no one found me for days? The night was the hardest. The cold sank in once the sun was gone. The ground was damp, and every time I shifted, sticks jabbed into my legs. My stomach growled hollow and sharp. I thought I heard things moving in the dark. Small animals scurrying maybe, or branches snapping. But every sound was sharper, louder when I couldn't see. I kept my back against the tree, eyes darting into the blackness, heart pounding at every noise. I must have drifted into short bursts of sleep, because the night seemed to stretch forever. But then the gray light of morning finally seeped through the branches. I felt worse than before. My body ached, my throat burned for water, and my head pounded from lack of sleep. I forced myself to stand. My legs trembled, but I had no choice. I needed water. I remembered reading that if you follow downhill long enough, you might find a stream. So I walked, keeping the slope in front of me. Hours passed, my feet blistered inside my shoes, and the forest seemed endless. My mouth was so dry, my tongue stuck to the roof. When I finally heard the faint trickle of water, I thought I was imagining it. But the sound grew clearer, and soon I stumbled onto a narrow stream running through the trees. Relief hit me so hard I almost fell to my knees. The water looked clear, moving fast over rocks, not stagnant. I bent down and drank greedily, not caring about anything except the taste of it on my tongue. It was icy cold, numbing my teeth, but it gave me life. I refilled my bottle and sat beside the stream for a while, trying to think. Part of me wanted to stay there, to follow it downstream and hope it led to people. Another part of me thought I should climb higher, try to find some kind of view. I chose to follow the water. It seemed like the best chance. The stream wound through thick patches of brush, and I had to push through thorny branches that tore at my arms. Mud clung to my shoes and made them heavy. The deeper I went, the rougher the ground became. Fallen trees forced me to climb over them, my hands scraping on bark. At one point, I slipped on wet rocks and went down hard, banging my knee so badly it throbbed with every step afterward. The hours dragged on. Hunger clawed at my stomach. I ate the granola bar, chewing slowly, trying to make it last. But soon it was gone and I had nothing left. My body felt weaker with each step, but the fear of stopping pushed me forward. The second night was worse. The stream gave me water, but it couldn't give me food or warmth. I curled beside it, shivering, my knee throbbing, my mind spinning with thoughts I couldn't control. I thought about my car waiting at the trailhead, about people walking the marked paths only miles away, about how close I might be to safety without knowing it. Every sound still tore through me, making me sit up, making my heart race. I didn't sleep much. By the third day, my body was breaking down. My lips cracked. My head felt light and I could barely lift my feet. I followed the stream as best I could, limping, gripping tree trunks for balance. Then sometime in the afternoon, I saw it. At first it was just a flash of something unnatural among the trees, something straight and clean. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But as I pushed through the brush, it became clear. It was a wooden post. And beyond it, through the leaves, I saw the faint line of a dirt road. The sight filled me with a surge of energy I didn't know I still had. I stumbled forward, branches scratching at me, shoes sinking in mud until I finally stepped out of the trees and onto the edge of the road. The sight of that road nearly brought me to tears. It wasn't wide, just a rough track used by trucks or hunters maybe, but it was human. It meant I was close to something. I forced myself to follow it, limping with every step. My head spun, but I kept moving. After what felt like forever, I saw the roof of a cabin in the distance, sunlight reflecting off the tin. I almost collapsed when I reached it. The cabin was old, but someone clearly used it. Tools leaned against the wall, and a stack of firewood sat beside the door. My voice cracked when I tried to call out, but no one answered. The door was unlocked, so I pushed it open. Inside was a table, a chair, some blankets, and cans of food stacked in a corner. I sank onto the floor, shaking, the smell of dust and wood filling my nose. For the first time in days, I felt safe. I ate until my stomach hurt, drank until I couldn't anymore, and then wrapped myself in a blanket, the weight of exhaustion pulling me down. I knew I wasn't saved yet. I still had to find my way back fully. Still had to make contact with someone. But that night, inside those 4 wooden walls, I finally felt like I might make it out, and I did. The next morning, I found a map tacked to the cabin wall, showing the road and where it connected to a highway. With food in my stomach and water in my bottle, I followed it until I reached the pavement where eventually a passing truck slowed to pick me up. I had been lost in the woods for 3 days. It felt like a lifetime. I never forgot the silence of those nights, the cold that sank into my bones, or the way every sound made my heart pound. And I never again stepped off a marked trail, because I learned how quickly the woods can turn against you, how easily the trees can close in and erase the path behind you, until you are nothing but another body lost in the endless green. I always thought getting lost in the woods was something that happened to careless people, the type who wander off trails without paying attention. I never thought it could happen to me, but I learned the hard way that it doesn't take much. Just one wrong step, one bad decision, and suddenly the forest swallows you whole. It started on a weekend when I decided to go hiking alone. I had been to this area before, though only on marked trails. I wanted something different this time, something quieter. The official paths were always full of joggers, families, and loud groups. I wanted silence. I wanted to feel like I was far away from everything. I parked my car near the trailhead, packed a backpack with water, some snacks, a small flashlight, and a thin jacket. My phone was fully charged, though I didn't have service in most parts of the forest. That didn't worry me then. I told myself I'd just follow one of the main paths for a while and maybe step off to explore, but not too far. The air was cool, the sky pale blue. It was early morning, maybe around 8 when I started walking. The sun was still low, filtering through the tall trees. The trail beneath my boots was damp from last night's rain, soft soil mixed with fallen leaves. For a while everything felt peaceful. Birds moved from branch to branch above me, and I could hear the faint trickle of a creek somewhere nearby. After about an hour, I came to a split in the path. I remembered that the right side looped back toward the parking lot. The left side stretched deeper, toward an older logging road that I'd heard about. I picked the left. It wasn't reckless, not yet. The path was still marked, though thinner, less used. As I walked, I noticed smaller trails branching off. Most were likely made by animals. A few looked like they could be old hiking routes, half hidden by undergrowth. The temptation grew stronger each time I saw one. They looked quiet, secret, like they would lead to places untouched by people. And then I did the thing I shouldn't have done. I stepped off the main trail. It was just a small path at first, lined with rocks, almost like it had been used before. I told myself I'd follow it for a little while just to see where it went, then come back. The air grew quieter as I walked down it. The sounds of people on the main trail faded until there was only the forest, the rustling leaves, distant bird calls, the creak of branches moving in the breeze. The path curved, then thinned, then seemed to vanish into a patch of ferns. I stopped, turned around, and looked back. The main trail was no longer visible. I could still remember the direction I came from, though, so I wasn't worried. I pushed on a little further, thinking maybe the trail would open back up again. It didn't. The forest grew denser. The trees pressed closer together. The ground sloped unevenly, making me stumble over roots. The sky above was harder to see through the thick branches. I kept telling myself to turn back, but something in me pushed forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was pride. I didn't want to admit I'd wandered off for nothing. When I finally decided to head back, I turned around and realized I couldn't see anything that looked familiar. The patch of ferns I passed earlier wasn't behind me anymore. It looked like every other patch of ferns. The trees looked the same too, tall and gray-barked, moss clinging to their bases. I walked in the direction I thought was right, but after a few minutes the land sloped differently. I didn't remember going downhill. I stopped, looked around, tried to picture the way I had come. My chest tightened a little. I told myself it was fine. I wasn't far from the trail. I just needed to adjust, so I adjusted. I picked a new direction and walked faster, thinking I'd see the main trail soon. But the forest only grew deeper. The undergrowth thickened. I saw no footprints, no signs of people, no candy wrappers, no carved initials on trees. Just silence. That's when I admitted to myself I was lost. The thought made me feel small. I pulled out my phone. No service, of course. I opened the map app anyway, hoping the GPS dot would help. But the dot floated on a blank green space, no trails visible. Useless. I took a deep breath and forced myself to stay calm. I had water. I had food. I had daylight left. If I kept track of my direction, I'd find something eventually. I picked a spot on the horizon where the trees parted slightly and started walking. Hours seemed to pass. The sun climbed higher, heating the air, then slowly tilted west. I drank half my water. I ate a granola bar while sitting on a log, listening to the quiet. The longer I sat, the more the quiet pressed in. The birds had gone. I heard only the occasional snap of a twig in the distance, maybe an animal, maybe the forest shifting. I stood up again and kept moving. I tripped often now, my legs growing heavy. The ground was uneven, hidden under piles of dead leaves. My ankles ached from twisting. My throat grew dry. At some point, I stumbled into a clearing. It was small, maybe 20 feet across, surrounded by thick trees. In the center stood the remains of a fallen log, hollow and rotting, with mushrooms sprouting along its side. For a moment, I felt relief, as if this clearing could be a landmark. But then I realized I had no idea how to use it as one. If I left and came back, I wouldn't even know it was the same clearing. The sun dropped lower. Shadows stretched long across the ground. I hadn't found a trail. I hadn't found water. My chest tightened again, harder this time. Panic itched at the edges of my thoughts, but I forced myself to breathe slow. I needed a plan. I decided I would stop soon, find a place to rest before dark. Walking in the night would only make things worse. I moved until I found a cluster of trees where the ground was dry and flat enough to sit. I dropped my backpack and leaned against the trunk. My stomach growled, but I only had a little food left, so I didn't eat. I sipped water, careful not to finish it all. Then night came. It came fast in the woods. One moment the sky was pale orange, the next it was dark blue, then black. The air turned colder. The forest changed too. Every sound grew sharper. Crickets screamed in the grass. Owls called from above. I heard rustling in the undergrowth, heavy enough to be larger animals. I sat stiff, gripping the flashlight in my hand. When I finally turned it on, the beam cut a small tunnel through the darkness. The trees around me glowed pale in its light, but beyond them was only black. My own breathing sounded too loud. I turned the light off again to save the battery and sat in darkness, hugging my knees, waiting for morning. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I woke at a sound, a snap, a thump, the flutter of wings. At one point, I thought I heard steady footsteps moving nearby. I held my breath until they faded, though I couldn't tell if it was just my mind twisting the sounds. By the time the sky turned gray again, I felt hollow. My throat was raw. My head ached from thirst and lack of sleep. I stood, shouldered my backpack, and forced my legs to move. Day 2 began with hope that I could find water. I knew without it I wouldn't last long. I followed the slope of the land downhill, thinking it might lead to a stream. Hours passed. My legs shook from exhaustion, but I pressed on, ears straining for the sound of running water. Finally, I found it, a shallow creek trickling between rocks. Relief washed over me. I dropped to my knees, cupped the water in my hands, and drank until my stomach cramped. The taste was dirty, metallic, but I didn't care. I filled my empty bottle too. I thought I might follow the creek. Usually streams led somewhere, maybe a larger river, maybe even civilization. I walked along its edge, slipping on wet rocks, swatting at swarms of flies. The sun climbed high, then dipped again. The creek twisted endlessly. No houses, no trails, just more woods. By evening, I was limping. Blisters burned on my heels. My stomach cramped again, this time from hunger. I ate the last of my snacks, a handful of nuts, and saved the water. That night, I found another spot under the trees to rest. My body shook from cold. My clothes were damp with sweat and creek water. I tried to curl up, but the forest gave no comfort. Something moved in the dark, sniffing, patting. I gripped a stick I had found earlier, ready to swing if anything came close. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would give me away. I lasted the night, though barely. By the third day, I was weaker. My legs trembled constantly. My head spun when I stood. I knew I couldn't wander much longer without food. I thought about mushrooms, berries, but fear stopped me. I didn't know which were safe. I thought about fishing in the creek, but I had nothing to catch with. The woods stretched endless around me. No trails, no people. Just trees pressing in tighter, as if the forest itself didn't want to let me go. The days blurred together after that. I walked, rested, drank from the creek, walked again. My lips cracked. My stomach twisted with hunger until the pain dulled into emptiness. I lost track of time. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes between the trees. Figures, movement, but when I blinked, they were gone. I realized it was just my mind breaking down. At one point, I stumbled into another clearing and found the remnants of a fire pit. Blackened stones, a circle of ash. My chest soared with hope. People had been here, maybe not long ago. I searched frantically around the area, looking for footprints, signs of direction, but the ground was too hard cover. I never thought the woods could swallow a person whole, but I learned that they could. It started as something simple. Nothing that should have gone wrong, just a walk that was supposed to take me along a trail and back before the sun went down. I wasn't new to being outdoors. I had camped before, hiked a handful of times, and thought I knew what to expect. The air smelled sharp with pine when I parked my car near the lot, and the dirt crunch under my shoes felt good. It was the kind of cool day that made you feel awake, with sunlight scattered through the tall trees in long broken stripes across the ground. The first stretch of the trail was easy. The dirt was packed, the path was wide, and there were even a few signs nailed to posts showing the way. I wasn't planning to go far, maybe a few hours in, then turn back. I had a bottle of water, A couple of granola bars, a flashlight just in case, and a small folding knife. Nothing serious. I wasn't camping. I wasn't expecting trouble. I just wanted to walk, to clear my head and feel small in the middle of tall trees. The sound of my shoes scraping gravel and dry needles was steady, a rhythm I kept without thinking. Every so often I'd stop and listen. There were birds, some small ones chattering up in the branches, and sometimes the sound of something moving in the brush. Probably squirrels, maybe deer. The wind pushed through the canopy and made the higher limbs creak and sway. I remember feeling calm, almost happy as I kept moving. The trail narrowed as I went deeper. It bent and turned, and the trees pressed closer on each side. The sunlight that had been scattered everywhere before started to thin out, caught higher above me where the branches tangled into a thicker roof. I kept track of my steps, or at least I thought I did. I knew people said you could lose track fast in woods, but I was watching. I remember telling myself that. Watching, paying attention. At one point I came to a fork. The left path sloped down darker, winding into thicker trees. The right path looked clearer, brighter, and I chose it without thinking much. The ground felt soft underfoot, covered in moss, and the silence pressed heavier as I walked further. I didn't see another person, not one. I should have turned back earlier. That's the part that stays with me. I could have walked back the way I came, but the trail kept pulling me. I told myself I'd go a little further before heading back. The air felt cooler and I liked it. The quiet was different, almost too heavy, but I ignored that. When I finally decided to turn around, I stopped and looked behind me, and for a second my stomach dropped. The way back didn't look the same. The trail I had been walking on seemed thinner, less clear, like it had been eaten up by the forest when I wasn't looking. I turned back and forth, trying to match where I came from, but the more I looked, the more twisted it seemed. The tall trunks looked too similar, the ground too even, like there wasn't a clear line anymore. I kept walking anyway, thinking maybe I was just overthinking it. The trail would connect back. Trails loop sometimes. I'd find the fork again, but I didn't. Instead, the ground sloped uneven and I found myself climbing a rise I didn't remember before. My shoes slipped on damp soil and caught against roots, and my breathing started to sound loud. I paused at the top and looked around, trying to see something familiar. Nothing. Trees in every direction, all the same size, their bark rough and gray-brown, their limbs tangled together high above. The light had changed. The sun was sliding lower, and in the woods it meant shadows stretched longer, thicker. I still had hours before dark, I told myself. I wasn't that far from where I started, but my stomach was tight. I walked faster, trying to retrace steps, but the ground didn't match. I passed a fallen tree with mushrooms growing in a line across its bark, and then later I passed another that looked almost the same. I couldn't tell if it was the same one or a different one. Every rock looked like another rock, every bend like the last. At some point I stopped walking and just stood there trying to listen. The birds were quiet now. I don't know when they stopped, but I realized I couldn't hear them anymore. The air felt colder too, sharp on my arms, and I pulled my jacket tighter. I picked a direction and kept going, moving faster than before. My water bottle rattled in my bag and my mouth felt dry. I didn't want to drink too much, not yet. It was when I tripped that the panic finally started to sink in. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard on my knees and palms. The sting of dirt and bark scraped my skin, and when I pushed up, I felt my heartbeat thumping too fast. I looked around from where I sat on the ground, and for a moment I couldn't tell which way I had been facing. It all looked the same. I got up and forced myself to keep moving. My legs felt shaky. The deeper I went, the more the trees pressed in. The air grew still, heavy, and I realized how far from the trail I must have wandered. By the time I noticed how low the sun had fallen, it was too late. The light was leaving fast, sliding away between the trunks, sinking into the floor of the forest where shadows bled together until it was hard to tell the ground from the trees. My flashlight was small, barely strong enough to cut through the dark. The beam hit trunks and bounced back. It only lit small patches of ground in front of me. Beyond that, the forest was black. The night in the woods is different than night anywhere else. It isn't just dark. It's layered, thick, the kind of dark that pushes against you, Sounds came back that hadn't been there in the day. Things moving in the brush, snapping twigs, the low creak of branches. I spun my light toward them, but the beam never showed anything. Just leaves trembling or nothing at all. I kept moving, though slower now. My throat was dry and I finally drank from the bottle. I ate one of the granola bars, sitting with my back against a tree. I didn't want to stop, but my legs were shaking. The ground felt damp through my clothes. That first night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat in the dark, flashlight in my lap, and listened. Every crack in the brush felt close, too close. At one point, something heavy moved not far off. The sound of weight-shifting leaves, and I froze. I gripped the little folding knife, even though I knew it was useless against anything larger than me. The sound went quiet, but I didn't relax. When dawn finally broke, the light came slow. Gray first, then pale. I had made it through the night, but it didn't feel like a victory. My body was stiff, my eyes heavy, and I was more lost than before. I stood and picked a direction again. That was the worst part. Every step was a gamble. I could be walking deeper or maybe closer. I wouldn't know until I found something. The hours dragged. My legs ached, my mouth was dry, and my bottle was already half gone. I tried to ration it, taking tiny sips, but my lips cracked. I started thinking about the parking lot. The smooth gravel, the sound of cars in the distance, and it felt like it had been weeks ago instead of yesterday. Around midday, I found a stream. The sound of water was faint at first, then stronger as I stumbled toward it. When I saw it shining between rocks, I almost cried. I dropped to my knees and drank straight from it, cold and sharp in my mouth. I filled my bottle, washed the dirt from my hands, and splashed water on my face. The relief didn't last. Streams cut everywhere in woods. They didn't mean civilization was close. They could run deep into nowhere. I followed it anyway, thinking maybe it would lead somewhere. The ground beside it was slick, mud clinging to my shoes, and the trees still hemmed me in tight. That night was worse. The cold pressed harder, sinking into my clothes, and I shook until my teeth hurt. I tried to make a small fire, but the sticks I gathered were damp and the flame never caught. I gave up and sat shivering in the dark. My stomach hurt with hunger. I heard things again in the brush. More than before. One set of steps was slow, heavy, almost deliberate. My light flashed across trees, but nothing moved. I clutched the knife in my hand until my fingers cramped. I couldn't tell if it was deer or something bigger, or just my head filling the silence with things that weren't there. On the third day, my throat burned from thirst, even though I had the stream. My legs dragged under me, weak. My thoughts blurred sometimes, and I caught myself talking under my breath just to break the silence. The woods pressed heavier the longer I stayed, as if they wanted me deeper. By the fourth day, my food was gone. My skin felt raw from branches scraping as I pushed through. I tried chewing leaves, but they tasted bitter, made me gag. My body felt smaller, like it was folding in. On the fifth day, when I thought I couldn't go further, I heard a sound that didn't belong. A low hum. I froze, listening. It came again, faint, broken, but real. The hum of traffic, cars. I stumbled toward it, half running, half falling. The trees broke unevenly ahead, light spilling through. I pushed through brush, and then suddenly I was on gravel, a road cutting through the forest. My knees gave out, and I fell onto the rough stones, gasping. A truck came minutes later, slowing when it saw me. I didn't have the strength to stand, only raised a hand. The driver stopped, stepped out, and his shadow fell across me. The woods were behind me then, silent, tall, and endless. They had held me for days, and they had let me go. But I knew as I sat there in the gravel, shaking and half-starved, that I never thought the woods would turn against me. I had always believed they were quiet, safe, almost welcoming. I went out there to clear my head, to be away from traffic, phones, noise, and work. That morning felt like the right time for a long walk. The air was cool, the sky pale blue with no sign of rain, and the trail I picked looked simple. I told myself I would be back by afternoon. I parked my car at a small gravel pull-off near the edge of the state forest. A narrow trail opened into the trees lined with tall pines, their needles forming a soft carpet beneath. The smell of earth and resin filled the air. I felt calm as I started, carrying just a small backpack with a bottle of water, a granola bar, and my phone. I didn't think much about what I was doing. I had walked trails before. I thought this would be no different. The first hour was smooth. The trail wound deeper, crossing little dips where rainwater had dried into cracked mud. Birds chirped overhead, and the occasional squirrel darted across the path. Sunlight poured through in streaks, flashing against my eyes when the wind moved branches. I walked steady, enjoying the silence, the crunch of my boots, the soft sway of the trees. But at some point I stopped paying attention to where the trail went. The dirt path split around a fallen tree, and I picked one side without thinking. It didn't seem important then. The ground looked walked on, and I trusted my sense of direction. The more I moved, the less I noticed how the trail began to fade. The trees grew closer together. Undergrowth thickened, and soon the packed dirt was just scattered patches between roots and moss. I told myself I could always backtrack. It didn't worry me at first, but I kept moving, convinced I would find the trail again just ahead. The woods all started to look the same, though. The same gray bark, the same towering pines, the same dead branches scattered underfoot. It was like walking in circles, even though I thought I was pushing straight. When I finally stopped to look around, I realized I couldn't see the trail anymore, not even a sign of it. My boots were standing on damp pine needles and scattered leaves, no footprints, no direction. I pulled my phone from my pocket, but there was no signal. The bars were gone. The little map app just showed a blank stretch of green with no blue dot moving across it. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself. The woods weren't endless. The forest was big, but not infinite. Roads cut through it, and there were fire lanes. If I just kept walking one way, I would hit something eventually. I convinced myself of that and picked a direction where the trees seemed thinner. But hours passed. The sun shifted high and then started to dip. I felt sweat cooling on my back as the air grew colder. The woods no longer looked welcoming. The trunks pressed closer and the underbrush clawed at my pants. I pushed through tangles of saplings and thorny vines, scratched and snagged, each step heavier. My water bottle was half empty already, and I hadn't eaten since the granola bar. I came across a shallow ravine, its sides crumbling dirt. I slid down and climbed back up, my legs burning. I saw broken branches, stumps, dead leaves piled thick. None of it looked familiar. I kept thinking I would see the trail at any second. Maybe a blaze of paint on a tree or a patch of worn dirt, but nothing came. Only more woods. By the time I admitted I was lost, the sky had started to dim. The blue drained into gray. I knew I had to find somewhere safe to rest because walking in the dark would be worse. I found a small clearing where the ground rose a little higher, away from the thickest brush. I gathered dead branches and tried to make a spot to sit. I didn't have matches or a lighter, something I cursed myself for forgetting, so I couldn't make a fire. I just sat there in the growing dark, hugging my knees, listening. That was the first time I noticed how loud the woods could be at night. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me flinch. The air cooled fast and I shivered, rubbing my arms. I tried to close my eyes, but every sound jolted me awake. I heard something moving through leaves, heavier than a squirrel. Maybe a deer, maybe not. My heart hammered in my chest, but I stayed still, too afraid to move. When morning came, it felt like no time had passed at all. My body ached, my clothes damp with dew. I stood, stretched my stiff legs, and forced myself to keep moving. I tried to follow the rising sun, telling myself it would lead east out of the forest. But the trees blocked most of it, only letting narrow rays shine through. The ground grew uneven, full of dips and roots. I tripped more than once, scraping my palms raw. Hours passed again. My mouth was dry, lips cracked. I rationed the last sips of water, swishing them before swallowing. Hunger gnawed at my stomach. I tried chewing a few sour-tasting leaves, spitting them out when they made my tongue burn. I thought about the granola bar I had eaten so easily the day before and wished I had saved it. By late afternoon, I stumbled onto something that gave me hope. A set of old tire ruts pressed into the dirt, half buried by grass and leaves. They looked faint, as if no one had driven there in years, but they were straight, cutting through the woods. My chest lifted. I followed them, thinking they would lead to a road, but the ruts just faded into the underbrush after a while, swallowed by roots and saplings. They led nowhere. My hope collapsed into a pit in my stomach. I sat down hard against a tree, staring at the ground, fighting the panic that wanted to take over. I thought about my car, sitting on the gravel shoulder, about how close it must have been without me knowing. I thought about water, food, all just out of reach. That second night was worse than the first. My throat felt like sand. I woke often, shivering, ears straining. At one point I heard something moving close. Slow steps crunching leaves. I held my breath, pressed myself flat against the ground, heart beating so loud I thought it would give me away. The sound lingered, faded, came back again. I never saw what it was. It left eventually, but I stayed frozen long after, too scared to move. Morning came again. I was weak, dizzy when I stood. My legs shook. I walked slower, pausing often, leaning against trees. My tongue felt swollen, lips cracked open. I knew I needed water soon. When I finally heard the faint trickle of it, it felt like salvation. I pushed toward the sound, stumbling downhill until I reached a narrow creek cutting through the woods. I dropped to my knees and plunged my face into it, drinking fast. The water was cold, metallic, but it slid down my throat and cooled the fire in my chest. I drank until my stomach cramped. Then I cupped more into my hands, splashing it across my face, wiping the dirt and sweat. I followed the creek after that, thinking it would lead somewhere. Creeks usually led to rivers, and rivers led to people. I stumbled along its bank, slipping on wet rocks, clawing at roots to keep steady. Time blurred. My stomach hurt from emptiness. My legs shook with every climb. By the third night, I could barely keep my eyes open. I curled under a fallen log, pulling leaves over myself for warmth. My body felt hollow. My head pounded with every heartbeat. My lips bled when I tried to lick them. I thought about food constantly. Bread, meat, even scraps, anything. My stomach growled, then cramped until I could hardly move. The next day I pushed forward again, following the creek until it widened into a deeper stream. I crossed it, slipping waist-deep into the cold water, my boots heavy, clothes soaked. On the far side I climbed up, dragging myself onto the bank. My arms shook so badly I almost slid back in. Then I saw something that nearly broke me. An old rusted hunting stand nailed into a tree, its steps broken but still hanging there. It meant people had been here once, maybe still came here. But when I looked around, the woods stretched endless in every direction. No cabin, no trail, no road, just the empty silence. I sat there for a long time, staring at it, tears burning my eyes. I wanted to give up, to lay down and never move again. But something in me forced me back to my feet. I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I knew I would die there. I kept walking, though each step felt like carrying stones. My body was weak, my mind foggy. Hours slipped by without me knowing. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes between trees, roofs, fences, but they vanished when I blinked. I fell more than once, scraping my arms, bruising my knees. Then as the sun was dipping low again, I heard a sound that made my heart pound. Not leaves, not animals. A distant hum. I froze, listening hard. It rose and fell, faint but steady. An engine. I forced my legs to move, stumbling toward it, crashing through brush. My lungs burned. My legs gave out and I crawled, pulling myself forward with my arms. The sound grew louder. And then through the trees I saw it. A strip of asphalt road cutting through the forest. I dropped to my knees on the shoulder, shaking, sobbing, pressing my hands to the solid ground. Cars rushed past in blurs, horns blaring when they saw me crawling out of the brush. I didn't care. I was out. When I finally waved one down, a man pulled over, wide-eyed, stepping toward me. My throat was too raw to speak, but I didn't need to. I had made it out. The woods had tried to take me, but I had walked until I found a way through. I never went back after that. I didn't plan on staying out that long. It was supposed to be just a short hike, something to clear my head, something simple enough that I didn't even bother telling anyone where I was going. The air had that sharp bite of late afternoon when I stepped off the main trail, and I remember thinking how good it felt to be away from the noise of traffic and the hum of people. The woods swallowed sound in a way that made me feel like I had walked into another world, even though I was no more than an hour outside of town. The path I was following wasn't even really a trail. Not anymore. It started as a thin track where other boots had pressed into the dirt, but after a while it turned into broken patches of earth scattered with dead leaves. I kept walking, thinking I would circle back once I had enough. I thought I had a good sense of direction. I thought I could always just turn around and retrace my steps. The forest was thick. Pines stood close together, their branches cutting the light into thin strips. Fallen logs stretched out like bones across the ground, and here and there the earth dipped into gullies where rainwater had carved shallow channels. I stepped over roots, ducked under branches, and let my mind wander. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses into your ears until you hear nothing but the blood moving in your own head. I didn't notice how far I had gone until the light had shifted, and the trees around me looked the same in every direction. I stopped for the first time to check behind me. I tried to spot something I recognized, a tree with a broken branch or a fallen trunk I had stepped over, but everything blurred together. The ground was covered in the same mix of pine needles and dead leaves, and the trunks were all gray and straight, lined up like soldiers. I told myself it was fine. I would just head back the way I came even if the path wasn't clear. I turned around and started walking, counting my steps to stay calm. After maybe 10 minutes, I realized nothing looked familiar. I turned again, trying a new direction. The woods didn't change. Every step looked like the last one. The first real wave of panic came when I saw the same crooked tree twice. It had a strange bend near its base where the trunk split into two, and I knew I had walked past it before. Somehow I had circled back without realizing it. That was when I understood I was lost. The light kept fading. In the forest, it goes faster than in open ground because the sun dips behind the canopy long before it sets. Shadows stretched out and the air grew colder. I walked faster, trying to convince myself I would find the trail again. But the more I moved, the more twisted the woods felt. My mouth was dry and I hadn't brought water. I hadn't brought food either. Not even a snack, because I never thought I'd be out long. My backpack was empty except for a jacket and my phone. When I pulled the phone out, the screen showed no signal. Just the thin outline of trees in the background, then black when I shut it off to save what little battery was left. I told myself to calm down, to think. People got lost in the woods all the time and they were usually found. If I stayed put, maybe someone would eventually notice I was missing. But no one knew I was out there. No one expected me to check in. I kept walking because standing still felt worse, like giving up. As night came, the woods closed in around me. The air was damp and the smell of pine was heavy, mixed with the sour scent of wet earth. I stumbled more often, catching my boots on roots I couldn't see. My hands were scratched from branches. I found a spot between two trees where the ground was soft with needles and decided to stop there. The darkness was absolute. Without the moon above me, without city lights in the distance, the black around me was complete. I lay down and pulled the jacket tight, listening. Every small sound carried. I heard twigs snap, leaves shift, something moving in the brush. My heart pounded so hard I thought the noise of it would draw things to me. The forest wasn't empty. Animals moved out there. Deer maybe, or smaller creatures. I imagined larger ones too. Things that might not like a human lying still on the ground. I clenched my fists and forced myself not to run. I didn't sleep. My eyes stayed open in the dark until they burned. Every sound stretched minutes into hours. My body ached from lying on the ground. The cold sank into my bones. When the first thin gray light of morning broke through, I pushed myself up and started walking again. Daylight didn't make me feel better. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, a sharp pain that turned to weakness. My mouth was dry as sand. My tongue stuck to my teeth. I searched for water, listening for the trickle of a stream, but heard nothing except the soft creak of trees swaying. I licked dew from leaves, crouching low and dragging my tongue across the wet edges like an animal. It tasted of dirt and old bark, but it eased the burning in my throat for a while. I walked for hours. My legs grew heavy. My thoughts slowed. The woods stretched endlessly, one hill after another, one patch of trees bleeding into the next. I looked for signs of people, cut branches, footprints, anything, but found none. My only company was the distant sound of birds and the occasional snap of something moving out of sight. At one point I saw a shape ahead, pale against the dark. My heart jumped. I thought it was a tent or maybe a hiker, but as I drew closer I saw it was just a boulder covered in pale moss standing out against the forest floor. The disappointment crushed me. I sat against it, head in my hands, until flies gathered around my sweat. Time lost meaning. I couldn't tell how long I had been out there. My legs trembled from walking. My skin itched from insect bites. I forced myself to keep moving, knowing that if I stopped too long I might not get back up. On the third day, though I wasn't even sure it was the third anymore, I found water. A shallow stream ran through a dip in the land, its surface reflecting the thin sky above. I dropped to my knees and drank until my stomach cramped. The water was cold and tasted of dirt and stone, but it filled me with strength I hadn't felt since I entered the woods. I splashed my face, washed the grime from my hands, and followed the stream, hoping it would lead me somewhere. But the stream twisted, splitting into smaller branches, some drying out into nothing. I chose wrong turns, followed dead ends, and each time I felt more lost than before. I shouted once, a raw sound tearing from my throat, but the forest swallowed it whole. Nights were worse. The sounds of animals came closer. I smelled the musk of something large once, maybe a deer or maybe not. I pressed myself against a tree, barely breathing, until the sound passed. Hunger became unbearable. My stomach felt like it was folding in on itself. I tried chewing leaves, grass, even stripping bark to gnaw, but it made me gag. I thought about being found, about how they might stumble across me weeks later, a body curled under the trees. The thought forced me to keep walking, even when my legs shook so badly I nearly fell. On what I guessed was the 5th or 6th day, I saw movement ahead. My chest tightened. Between the trees, sunlight glinted off something straight and unnatural. I stumbled toward it, and when I broke through the brush I saw it, a fence old and rusted stretching through the woods. It was man-made. Proof of people. I followed it. My hand slid along the rough wire as I walked, keeping it beside me, afraid to lose it. After an hour, it led me to a clearing. Beyond the fence stood a dirt road, tire tracks pressed into the soil. I climbed over, my legs weak, my palms bleeding from the rust. I stood in the road, breathing hard, and looked both ways. Empty, silent. But it was a road. If I followed it long enough, it would take me somewhere. I turned right and walked. Each step was slow, dragging, but I kept moving. The sun dipped again, shadows stretching across the road, but I didn't stop. My body screamed for rest, but I kept on. Finally, as the sky went dark, I saw a light ahead. A house, small, distant, but real. I forced myself forward, stumbling, my vision swimming. By the time I reached the driveway, I was barely standing. Gravel crunched under my boots. The house was plain, with a porch light glowing yellow. A car sat in front, proof someone lived there. I stepped into the yard, my throat raw, my chest heaving. Relief flooded through me, so strong I nearly collapsed. I was out. I was alive. I never thought I would know what it feels like to vanish in the woods. People always said it was easy to get turned around, easy to lose your sense of direction once you stepped off the trail. But I always thought it only happened to careless people. I used to believe that as long as you kept your head, followed common sense, and paid attention, you couldn't get lost. Now I know that's not true. It doesn't take much. It just takes one wrong step, one poor decision, and the forest swallows you whole. The morning I went out, the air was cool, heavy with that damp smell of pine and dirt. I had packed light, just a small backpack with water, some snacks, a lighter, a knife, and my phone. I wasn't planning to stay long, just a few hours of walking. I parked my car near a pull-off by the side of the highway, where a narrow trail disappeared into the trees. I'd seen it many times before and finally decided to see where it led. It wasn't on any map, at least not one I could find, but that only made it more interesting. At first, the path was easy to follow. The ground was worn down from use, and though the trees pressed close, the way forward was clear. I walked with steady steps, listening to the crunch of twigs under my boots, the distant sound of a woodpecker hammering against a trunk. The forest was alive but calm, and I felt that deep quiet you only feel when you're far from other people. The trail twisted and curved, sometimes climbing over roots, sometimes dropping into shallow dips. After maybe an hour, I reached a fork. The ground showed no real sign of which way was more traveled, but the left side looked a little wider. I went that way, thinking I'd just turn back if it looped somewhere. That was my mistake. The trail grew faint, the dirt path breaking into patches of grass and moss. I kept going, telling myself I'd recognize landmarks on the way back. The trees grew taller and closer, their branches locking overhead to block out more of the sky. I lost the sound of the road, lost even the faint noise of birds for a while. It was just me, my breathing, and the steady pace of my boots against the ground. Then the trail vanished altogether. I stopped and looked around, expecting to see where it picked up again, but all I saw was undergrowth and tree trunks. No packed dirt, no trail. I thought maybe I had just stepped off it without realizing, so I backtracked. But within a minute I couldn't tell where I'd come from. Every direction looked the same. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I pulled out my phone. No service. The signal bar was empty, not even one flickering line. I tried to drop a pin on the map anyway, but nothing loaded. I put the phone back and looked around. The forest stretched in every direction, a maze of green and brown. I picked a direction that looked slightly open and started walking. I told myself I would hit the trail again or maybe a road, but the deeper I went, the more lost I became. The hours slipped by. The sun shifted overhead, beams of light stabbing through the canopy, moving slowly until the forest grew darker. My stomach ached with hunger, and I sipped my water sparingly, not knowing how long it needed to last. I tried to follow my own tracks, but the ground was hard. Dry in some places, soft in others, and soon my boot prints blended with animal tracks and scattered leaves. By evening, panic had begun to press at the edges of my mind. The trees looked twisted now, every trunk the same, every patch of ground familiar in a way that only made it worse. I couldn't tell if I was walking in circles. The shadows stretched long, and the cool air of morning had turned into a damp, heavy chill. I thought about building a fire before it got completely dark. I found a small clearing, piled up sticks, and used my lighter. The flame caught quick, crackling and spitting until I had a small fire going. I sat close to it, hugging my knees, watching the glow push back the black of the forest. The fire gave me comfort, but it also made me nervous. I didn't know who or what might see it. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound in the forest seemed sharper in the dark. Branches snapped somewhere far off. Something rustled through leaves. Once I heard a low grunt that made the hairs rise on my neck. I gripped the knife in my hand, staring into the black beyond the firelight. My mind kept conjuring shapes between the trees, figures watching, waiting. But when I blinked, they were gone. When morning finally came, I felt drained, but I forced myself to keep moving. The fire had burned out, leaving only cold ash. I stuffed my knife back into my pocket, tightened the straps of my backpack, and walked. I chose what I thought was east, following the light of the sun. For hours I trudged over roots and rocks, pushing through thick undergrowth that tore at my clothes and scraped my skin. My legs ached, my lips cracked from thirst, and the last of my water was almost gone. Around midday I stumbled across something that made my stomach twist. A torn piece of blue fabric caught on a branch. It looked like it had been there a long time, faded by the weather. My first thought was another hiker. But there was no trail here, no reason for anyone to be this deep in the woods. I picked it free and held it, then dropped it quickly. I didn't want to think about how it got there. As the hours dragged on, I found myself getting careless. I tripped more often, scraped my shins on rocks, and once fell to my knees so hard I almost couldn't get back up. My thoughts grew foggy. I started thinking about water constantly. My throat was raw. Then I heard it, the faint trickle of something ahead. I pushed through thick brush and found a stream. I dropped to my knees and drank greedily, ignoring the risk of sickness. The water was cold and sharp, and it filled me with a small burst of strength. I followed the stream, hoping it would lead to a river and maybe to people, but instead it led me deeper. By the third day, I was falling apart. My stomach cramped from hunger, my body weak. I ate a handful of berries I recognized as safe, but they only gave me a brief relief. My face felt burned from the sun, my hands blistered. I stopped caring about direction. I just moved, dragging one foot in front of the other. Then I found the clearing. It wasn't natural. The ground was scraped bare in a wide circle. The dirt packed down like something heavy had been dragged there again and again. At the edge there was an old fire pit blackened with ash. Bones lay scattered nearby, small ones like from rabbits or squirrels, but some were bigger. I froze, staring. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. I backed away, but my boot snapped a stick and the sound was deafening in the silence. That's when I noticed something else. A rope tied low around a tree, frayed and stained dark. It looked like it had been cut free. Every instinct in me screamed to leave. I turned and stumbled into the trees, my chest tight, breath ragged. From that moment on, I felt watched. The woods weren't empty. They couldn't be. The bones, the rope, the fire pit, they meant people. But not the kind I wanted to find. That night I didn't build a fire. I curled against a tree, shivering in the cold, listening to every sound. Once I swore I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, just beyond sight. My mouth went dry and I held the knife, barely breathing, but nothing came close. Nothing showed itself. The following day I forced myself to move faster, stumbling through thorns and muck, following the stream again. I knew if I stopped too long I'd never start again. My body was failing, but fear pushed me. By the 5th day I was broken. My skin was scratched raw, my lips bleeding, my legs weak. My head spun, and sometimes I saw things that weren't there. Shapes in the trees, shadows moving. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Then as I pushed through another thick wall of brush, I saw it. A road. The sight almost dropped me to my knees. Asphalt stretched in both directions, cracked and weathered, but real. I stumbled forward, tripping onto it, my palms scraping against the rough surface. Tears stung my eyes. Minutes later, a truck came around the bend. The driver hit the brakes, staring at me as if I were some wild animal crawling out of the forest. I must have looked like one. Dirty, scratched, my clothes torn. He opened the door, and though I couldn't make out his words, I saw his lips move, his hand reaching for me. I collapsed before I could answer. When I woke again, I was in a hospital bed, an IV in my arm, clean sheets under me. I felt safe for the first time in what felt like years. But even now, long after, the memory of that clearing won't leave me. The bones, the rope, the sense of being watched. I made it out of those woods, but part of me never left. And I know with a cold certainty that someone else is still out there. I didn't plan to get lost. Nobody ever really does. I thought I knew the trail. I thought I had enough daylight. I thought I was more careful than this. But the woods don't care what you think you know. They close in on you slowly, without you realizing how far you've gone or how far you've drifted from the safe parts until it's too late. It started as a normal walk. I had been restless for a few weeks, too much time spent inside, too many days blending together. The woods always felt like a way to reset. I liked the quiet, the smell of pine, the crunch of dirt under my boots. The weather was perfect that day. Cool air, clear sky, and just enough wind to keep the branches moving. I carried a small backpack with water, some trail mix, a flashlight, and a folded map I rarely even looked at anymore. I had walked these trails plenty of times, at least the marked ones, but I liked cutting off into smaller paths, following deer tracks or game trails just to see where they led. That habit is what started the whole mess. About an hour in, I noticed a narrow track that curved away from the main trail. It wasn't marked, but it looked like it had been walked before. The dirt was pressed down, leaves scattered aside, maybe from hunters or locals who knew shortcuts. I figured it couldn't hurt to follow it for a while. My plan was simple. Walk a little way, see something new, then double back to the main path. That was all. But when you step off a marked trail, everything looks the same after a while. The line between what's path and what's just ground blurs. I kept walking, thinking I'd recognize the way back. I told myself I'd turn around after 15 minutes. Then 30 passed, then an hour. By the time I stopped, the path under me was gone. There wasn't even a faint trail left. Just pine needles, roots, and endless trees in every direction. At first, I didn't panic. I've always been decent with directions. I thought I could retrace my steps. I turned back the way I thought I'd come, but after 20 minutes, nothing looked familiar. The sunlight filtering through the trees shifted, making everything look different. I tried cutting across in a straight line, but straight is impossible in the woods. You weave around trees, rocks, low branches, and before long, you're walking in circles without even knowing it. I didn't want to admit I was lost, but the longer I walked, the heavier that word sat in my head. Lost. The first sign of trouble was the silence. Out there deep in the trees, sound changes. At the start of the hike, I heard birds, squirrels, wind rushing overhead. Out here, it was muffled. No birds, no rustling. Just my own footsteps and breathing. It felt like the woods swallowed everything else. That quiet pressed in on me until it felt like weight on my chest. I stopped to check my phone. No signal, of course. I wasn't surprised. But the empty bars on the screen made my stomach sink. The time was later than I thought. Almost 5. That meant the sun would dip within a couple of hours. I needed to find the trail before then. I tried the map next, but the truth is, paper maps are useless when you don't even know your starting point. The woods don't come with street signs. Every hill looks like another hill. Every cluster of trees looks the same. As the sun dropped lower, panic started pushing harder at me. My heart beat fast even when I stood still. My throat was dry, though I'd been sipping water. The light changed from gold to orange to dull gray, and the shadows stretched longer. Trees that had seemed calm in daylight now loomed like walls. By the time I admitted I wasn't getting out before dark, I had to make a choice. Keep stumbling around until I couldn't see, or stay put. I chose to stay. I cleared a small space, brushing away pine needles and sticks with my boots, and sat down against a tree. The ground was cold and uneven, but I tried to stay calm. I told myself people got lost in the woods all the time and made it through a night. That was true. But those people usually had gear. I didn't have much, no sleeping bag, no tent, not even a proper knife. Just a small flashlight and enough water for one day. The first night was the worst kind of waiting. Darkness in the woods is total. You think your eyes will adjust, but they don't. Not really. Beyond the weak beam of my flashlight, everything was just black. When the battery dimmed, I switched it off to save it, and the darkness swallowed me whole. That's when the noises started. In the day, the woods had been quiet. At night, they came alive. I heard things moving through the brush, snapping twigs, rustling leaves. I told myself it was deer, maybe raccoons. But the sounds didn't move in quick bursts the way small animals do. They lingered. Slow steps, pausing, moving again, always just out of sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I froze, holding my breath, ears straining. Every time I thought I'd pinned the sound down, it shifted like it was circling. My skin prickled. Sweat cold on my back, though the air was freezing. I wanted to shine the flashlight, but I was terrified of what I might see. Or worse, what I wouldn't. That first night, I barely slept. My body slumped against the tree, head nodding off and snapping back up whenever a sound jolted me awake. Hours stretched like days. The temperature dropped, and I shivered so hard my teeth hurt. By the time dawn broke, I felt half dead already. Morning brought some relief. The trees glowed with light again, and the noises faded. But now exhaustion dragged at me. My body ached. My mouth was dry, and I rationed the little water I had left. I had to keep moving. I walked in what I thought was a straight line. The ground rose and fell in ridges. I pushed through underbrush, climbed over fallen logs, scraped my hands on bark and stone. Hours passed, but I found nothing. No trail, no road, no cabin, no sound of cars in the distance. Only more woods. The second day wore me down. Hunger gnawed at me. I chewed handfuls of dry trail mix, but it barely touched the hollow feeling in my stomach. My throat burned with thirst, and I started eyeing muddy puddles. I knew it wasn't safe, but the thought clawed at me. I held off, but it was getting harder. As evening came again, the dread hit harder than before. I didn't want another night out there. The shadows grew long, and the silence deepened. When I finally stopped, I tried to build some kind of shelter. I piled branches and leaves against a fallen log, crawling under like an animal. It barely blocked the wind, but it felt better than nothing. That second night was worse than the first. The sounds came back. Louder, closer. This time, I knew it wasn't my imagination. I heard the steady crack of footsteps, heavier than any small animal. They crunched leaves, snapped twigs, then stopped. The waiting was the worst. The silence between steps. I lay under the branches, holding my breath, praying it would pass. But every time I thought it moved away, it came back. At one point, I swore I heard breathing. Not mine, not animal huffing. Slow, steady human breathing just beyond the log. My whole body went rigid. I pressed my hand over my mouth, shaking. The breathing stopped. Then faintly, I heard something scrape against wood. My log, I stayed still until my muscles screamed. Hours crawled by. I don't know when I finally passed out. Daylight came again, and I almost cried with relief. My mind felt shredded, but I forced myself to move. I stumbled through the trees, weak and shaking, searching for water. By midday, I found a small creek, shallow but clear. I fell to my knees and drank until my stomach cramped. The water gave me enough strength to keep moving. I followed the creek, thinking it might lead to a river, maybe a road. But it twisted endlessly, cutting deeper into the woods. The banks grew steep, and I slipped more than once, my hands raw from grabbing roots. By the third night, I was broken. My legs barely worked, my lips cracked, my stomach empty. I didn't bother with a shelter. I sat by the creek, curled up, shivering. That night, the sounds returned again. Only now, they weren't circling. They came closer. Twigs snapped just beyond the trees. Footsteps pressed into wet ground. This time, I turned on my flashlight. For a second, the beam caught movement. A shape slipping behind a tree. Too tall for an animal, too fast to make out. My stomach dropped. I turned the light everywhere, hands shaking, but saw nothing. Only the dark, endless woods. The realization hit me like ice. I wasn't alone out here. The following day, I forced myself to move faster, even as my body protested. Every sound behind me made me whip around. Sometimes I thought I saw movement. A shadow, a flicker, but never enough to be sure. I kept following the creek until at last the trees thinned. Through the gaps, I saw a light. Open space. When I broke through, I stumbled into a wide gravel road. I almost collapsed with relief. My whole body sagged. Not long after, I heard an engine. A truck appeared, bouncing along the gravel. I staggered into the middle of the road, waving my arms. The driver slammed the brakes, jumped out, and helped me into the cab. I was too weak to speak much. When he asked what happened, I just said I got lost. I didn't tell him about the sounds. I didn't tell him about the breathing or the shape I saw. I didn't want to know if it was real, if someone had been out there with me in the dark, but I know. Because as the truck pulled away, I looked back at the tree line. For just a second, I saw movement again. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, half hidden in the shadows, watching, and then it was gone. I never thought much about the woods near my town. They were always there, stretched out in the distance like a dark ocean of trees. From the roads, they looked calm, quiet, just another piece of land where people sometimes hiked or hunted. I had gone out there before, but only on marked trails, and I always made sure to turn back before the sun started to drop. I used to think I understood them, thought I knew how easy it was to follow the dirt paths and get back to the car. But that changed the day I tried to take a shortcut. It started out simple. I had driven out early that morning with the plan of making a long loop through one of the bigger trail systems. I packed light, just a bottle of water, a couple of snacks, and a small flashlight in case things ran a little late. I didn't bring my phone charger, didn't think I'd need it. The forecast had been clear. The air was cool when I got out of the car, the smell of pine needles and damp earth rising as soon as I stepped onto the trail. For a while, it was nice. Birds called in the branches. The crunch of gravel under my boots set a steady rhythm, and the sun broke through the gaps in the trees in strips of gold. Hours passed like that. I followed the trail markers easily, watched the distance shrink on the map I had folded in my pocket. Around midday, I stopped to sit on a log and eat a granola bar, listening to the wind moving the branches. Everything felt calm. But after I started walking again, something caught my attention. A path, thin and overgrown, split off from the main trail. It wasn't marked. It looked like it had been used once, maybe by hunters or animals. But now it was just a faint line in the grass. I stood there for a long moment staring at it. The map I had didn't show it, but I had the thought that maybe it cut across the loop and came out closer to where I had parked. The idea of saving time tempted me. I'd walked enough that my legs felt heavy. and the thought of trimming a couple miles off the hike sounded good. The dirt trail under my boots looked solid enough. I told myself it would be fine, that I'd keep the sun on my left and just push through until I reconnected with another trail. So I left the safety of the main path and stepped onto the narrow shortcut. The first few minutes weren't bad. It wound through patches of ferns and pine saplings, the ground soft and scattered with needles. But as I moved deeper, the path got thinner until it was barely visible. Soon I was pushing branches out of my way, my jacket catching on thorns, the sound of the wind dulling behind me as the trees grew thicker. I kept looking back, thinking I'd see where it joined the main trail again, but it was already gone, swallowed by the woods. I pressed on, telling myself I just needed to keep steady. My boots slipped on damp moss. The sun flashed through the canopy and the ground began to slope downward. After an hour, the light looked different. The shadows stretched longer and I realized I had no idea where I was. I stopped and pulled out my map, flattening it against my knee. The trees pressed so close together that I couldn't even get my bearings. I knew the sun had shifted, but now I couldn't remember if it had been on my left or right when I started down the shortcut. The map felt useless, a sheet of lines that didn't match the reality around me. I shoved it back in my pocket, telling myself to stay calm. I kept walking, hoping to find a landmark, maybe a stream or a clearing. Instead, the forest only grew thicker. The underbrush dragged at my boots, brambles tore at my pants, and spiderwebs stuck across my face as I stumbled through. My water bottle was already half empty, and I caught myself sipping too often. By the time I admitted I was lost, the sky had already started to change. The light shifted to that dull gray before evening, and the air cooled fast. Every sound carried farther. The creak of branches, the crack of twigs, the distant calls of animals I couldn't see. My chest tightened with every step. I had no idea how far I'd come. No sense of direction anymore. When the sun finally slid low, panic started to creep in. I tried to pick a direction and stick with it, but the forest felt endless. Trees looked the same in every direction, tall trunks crowding close, the ground uneven with rocks and roots. My boots caught on them again and again until my legs burned. Then the real dark came. I pulled out the flashlight, switched it on, and a weak circle of light opened in front of me. The batteries weren't fresh, and I cursed myself for not checking them before leaving the car. The light wavered, showing only a short patch of ground before being swallowed by the blackness. The forest changed at night. Sounds sharpened. Every snap of a twig sounded like footsteps. Every rush of leaves sounded like something moving nearby. I swung the light back and forth, expecting to see eyes staring back. The silence between the sounds felt worse than the noises themselves. I tried to keep walking but slowed down, afraid of twisting an ankle or tripping in the dark. My arms shook from holding the flashlight, my mouth dry. I thought about stopping, maybe waiting until morning, but the idea of sitting in that black forest all night felt impossible. So I kept stumbling forward, branches slapping my face, my boots sinking into soft patches of mud. At some point I realized I was circling. A fallen tree I had passed before appeared again in the beam of my flashlight. My heart sank. I had been walking in loops without knowing it. The night dragged on forever. Hunger twisted in my stomach, thirst burned my throat. My flashlight flickered more often now, threatening to die at any second. My mind started to play tricks. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every sound felt aimed at me. I thought about how far I was from anyone. How unlikely it was someone would hear me if I screamed. I forced myself to keep moving, hoping to find something. A road, a cabin, even just the faint line of another trail. My legs felt heavier with each step, my breath ragged. When dawn finally started to bleed through the branches, pale and gray, I almost cried from relief. But the woods in daylight didn't look any friendlier. They stretched out in every direction, endless repeating, and I had no clue which way to go. My water was gone, my stomach hollow, and every step ached. I tried to listen for sounds of cars, rivers, anything. But all I heard was the forest breathing around me. Hours dragged on. The sun climbed and then began to sink again. I tried to follow its path, tried to guess which way might lead back to the parking lot, but I was only guessing. My lips cracked, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth, and every muscle begged me to stop. By the second night, I was broken. My flashlight gave one last sputter and died. leaving me in total black. I huddled against a tree, pulling my jacket tight, shaking from the cold. I barely slept, jerking awake at every sound, certain something was approaching. My mind filled with thoughts of animals, of never being found, of my body blending into the forest floor like the fallen branches around me. Morning came again, pale and weak. My body felt like it wasn't mine anymore. I moved slower, stumbling, barely able to lift my feet. I thought I saw movement ahead. Thought I heard something, but it was only more trees. It was the sound of water that finally saved me. Faint at first, then stronger. I dragged myself toward it, tripping over rocks, forcing my way through thorn bushes until I broke into a clearing and saw a narrow stream cutting through the woods. The sight of it hit me like a lifeline. I dropped to my knees, scooping water into my mouth, ignoring how dirty it tasted. Following that stream was my only plan. I pushed myself along its edge, step after step, hoping it would lead somewhere. After what felt like forever, the trees began to thin. My legs wobbled as I stepped out of the woods and onto gravel. A road. The relief almost knocked me down. I staggered along it until I saw the outline of a house in the distance. My whole body shook, every ounce of strength gone. But I kept moving until I reached the porch and collapsed. I had been lost in those woods for nearly 3 days. Even now, safe and home again, the memory clings to me. I can still feel the weight of the forest pressing close. Still hear the sounds that stalked me through the dark. The woods look different to me now, not calm or quiet, but endless, waiting, ready to swallow anyone who steps off the path. And I know one thing for sure. I'll never take a shortcut again. I never thought a short walk would turn into something that would take so much from me. When I think about it now, I can't believe how simple it all started, how harmless it looked, and how fast things turned into something I still struggle to put into words. I went into the woods that morning with nothing heavy on my mind. No reason to feel uneasy. No reason to imagine I might not make it back out. But the woods don't care about plans, and when you're deep enough inside, every mistake adds up until there's nothing left but survival. It began with a small decision. I was staying at a cabin my cousin had rented for a weekend. It wasn't far from a state forest, a huge spread of thick pine and oak trees with trails that twisted into each other like veins. I'd been to the area once before, and I remembered how peaceful the woods were. That morning the others were still asleep, and I didn't feel like sitting around the cabin, so I laced up my shoes and told myself I'd go for a short walk. Nothing serious. Just fresh air and maybe some quiet time before the day started. I didn't take much with me. No map, no compass, no food. Just a half-full bottle of water, my phone, and the clothes I had on. It was supposed to be an hour at most. The trail behind the cabin was clear enough. Packed dirt. Leaves pressed flat by shoes. The smell of pine needles heavy in the cool morning air. Birds were calling from somewhere high up, and every so often I heard the snap of something small moving in the underbrush. It was the kind of place that feels alive in ways you don't notice in towns or cities. Everything moves, everything watches, everything has its place. For a while I just walked and breathed. The kind of quiet where you hear your own shoes crunch on the dirt louder than anything else. After a little while I came to a fork in the trail. One way bent back toward where I'd come from. The other pushed deeper into the woods. I should have turned back, but it felt early, and I told myself I'd go just a little further. I've always had this problem where I keep thinking, I'll stop at the next bend, the next hill, the next clearing. I thought I'd recognize landmarks well enough to find my way back. It was the first mistake, and the one that set up everything after it. The deeper trail looked less used, more narrow, with branches bending low enough that I had to duck in places. The air smelled damper, heavier, like the ground didn't dry out much there. After maybe 20 minutes, I noticed the trail wasn't as clear. Leaves and pine needles covered the dirt, so it was harder to see if anyone even used it. But it still looked like a path. A deer trail maybe, but it pointed somewhere and I kept following. By the time I realized I couldn't tell where the main trail had been, it was too late. I stopped and turned around and everything looked the same. Trees in every direction, no clear markers. My stomach dropped. I told myself to stay calm, that I could backtrack if I looked closely enough. So I turned and tried to retrace my steps, watching the ground for shoe prints or broken twigs. But the forest floor hides things fast. Every shadow looked like a path. Every gap between trees looked like something I had walked through before. I went one way, then another, circling, trying to line up things in my head. Nothing matched. The silence hit harder then. Birds had gone quiet. The air pressed down heavier. I could hear my own breathing, sharper than before, and the sound of it made me feel stupidly loud in a place that suddenly felt hostile. I told myself it wasn't serious, that I just had to find higher ground or an opening, that I wasn't really lost. But as I kept walking, nothing changed. Just trees, endless and repeating, and the growing knot of fear in my chest. I checked my phone. No signal. The battery was already low from the night before. I turned it off to save what was left. My water bottle felt lighter in my hand. I sipped but tried not to drink too much. The air was warm now, the kind that dries your throat quick. I hadn't thought about the sun earlier, but now I realized I had no clue what direction it had come up in. The canopy above was thick, with only cracks of light stabbing through in places, so I couldn't use it to guide me. Every direction felt like guessing. Hours passed. I know because the shadows shifted, stretching longer. My legs started to ache from the constant walking, and my throat was dry no matter how carefully I sipped the water. I came across a small clearing at one point, a patch of moss and ferns where the ground dipped. I thought I'd recognize it if I circled back, so I tried to mark it. I picked up a stick and scratched an X on the trunk of a tree. Then I kept walking. An hour later, I stumbled back into the same clearing from the opposite side. My own mark stared back at me from the tree. I hadn't gone anywhere, just circles. Panic crept in then, not the screaming kind, but the heavy kind that sits in your chest and makes every step feel slower. I forced myself to keep moving. I told myself I'd find water. Streams lead to rivers, rivers lead to people. That thought kept me walking, scanning for any sound of running water. My ears played tricks on me. I thought I heard a faint rush once, but when I followed it, it was only wind moving through leaves. As the day stretched, I grew clumsier. Roots caught my shoes. Branches slapped across my arms. I stumbled more than once and nearly went down hard. The woods don't forgive clumsiness. One bad fall and you're done. That thought kept pushing itself into my head. I imagined snapping an ankle miles from anyone, lying there while the sun went down. It made me walk slower but careful, eyes on the ground. By late afternoon, hunger clawed at me. I hadn't brought food and my stomach ached from it. I thought about berries, mushrooms, anything I could eat, but I didn't know which were safe and which weren't. I didn't dare risk it. The only thing I did was chew on a pine needle at one point, just to have something in my mouth. The bitterness stayed on my tongue for hours. Then came the first night. I wasn't ready for how fast the dark comes in the woods. One minute it was light enough to see, and the next everything was fading. The canopy swallowed the last bits of sun until it was just shadows and blackness. The air turned cold, sharper than I expected. My thin jacket wasn't enough. I shivered and wrapped my arms around myself, trying to conserve heat. Every sound was louder in the dark. Cracks of twigs, rustles in the underbrush, the distant hoot of an owl. My mind turned every noise into something watching me, something waiting. The trees pressed close, shapes in the blackness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being stared at from 100 unseen eyes. I didn't dare walk at night. One wrong step and I'd break something. So I found a spot between two thick roots and sat down, knees tucked to my chest. I tried to rest, but sleep never came. The ground was cold and damp. Bugs crawled across my arms. My ears wouldn't stop straining at every noise. Hours dragged. I counted heartbeats, breaths, anything to mark the passing of time. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under for a little while, but dreams twisted into half-awake fears of being dragged deeper into the woods. When light finally broke through the canopy, it was pale and weak, but it was enough. My muscles ached from sitting and my throat felt dry as sandpaper. My water bottle was nearly empty. I forced myself to sip the last of it. It wasn't enough. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I needed water more than food now, so I picked myself up and started moving again. The second day blurred. Walking, stumbling, searching. The sun overhead helped me guess directions better than before, but I still didn't know where I was going. At one point, I found tracks in the dirt. Deer, by the shape. I followed them, hoping they'd lead to water. They wound through thick brush and led me to a low, muddy patch. Not a stream, just stagnant water collected in a dip. The surface was green and buzzing with insects. I crouched and stared at it for a long time. My stomach twisted with thirst. I knew drinking it would probably make me sick. I told myself to resist, but my lips burned for moisture. I cupped a little in my hand and brought it to my mouth. The taste was foul, earthy, and rotten, but I swallowed. It sat heavy in my stomach. Hours later, cramps gripped me, sharp and twisting, and I had to crouch in the brush, shivering with sweat. But it was water, and it kept me moving. That night was worse. My body weaker, my head heavier. The cold bit deeper than before, and I shook so hard my teeth rattled. I pressed against a tree trunk for shelter, but it did little. Sounds in the dark felt closer this time, like things moved just out of sight. My imagination painted figures in the blackness, but I knew it was only animals. Still, fear doesn't listen to reason. It sat in my chest like a weight, crushing me from the inside out. The third day, I stumbled more than I walked. My lips cracked, my tongue swollen. My body screamed for food. I found acorns under an oak, broke them open with a rock, and chewed the bitter meat. It barely filled the emptiness. I walked slower, head spinning. At one point, I thought I saw a trail ahead. Dirt pressed smooth like the main path. I pushed toward it, heart racing, only to find it was nothing but a line of deer tracks again. My hope drained with it. I sank to my knees and just sat there off.